South Africa's economic recovery stumbled in the third quarter of 2021. Africa's most advanced economy suffered several setbacks in the previous year. One of the main issues was unemployment. The official unemployment rate was 34.9% in the third quarter of 2021. Throughout the year, South Africa kept breaking its own unemployment record. And this follows the country into 2022. It was also in 2021 that the country witnessed a deadly spree of violence and looting, which engulfed the provinces of Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. Now, thousands of businesses were gutted and at least 330 people were killed. The city of Durban estimated over $1 billion in damages and lost goods and said the violence put 129,000 jobs at risk. 2021 was also the year that South Africa went back into lockdowns and more restrictions from the continued spread of the coronavirus. But the 365 days of 2021 have come and gone. And now South Africa, like the rest of the world, is looking to 2022 and what it has in store. South Africa's economic growth will moderate this new year, following a projected strong bounce back. The high unemployment rates and increasing public debt stock do pose key challenges to this outlook. Our focus today is South Africa's 2022 economic outlook. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me today is Christie Viljoen. He's an economist with PwC South Africa and, of course, a regular on the show. Christie, good to see you again. Welcome and Happy New Year.
Good morning. Happy New Year to you as well.
All right, so let's get straight into it. So as I mentioned in my introduction, it was a very tough year for South Africa, particularly with the unemployment. You had load shedding and some of the violence as well. But let's just wrap that all up. There are some issues that are going to unfortunately be carried over into 2022. So what issues are those?
Well, those that you mentioned are some of the big issues we're dealing with. I think with the impact of COVID-19 slowly disappearing, and I'm saying slowly, the biggest challenge now is, again, electricity load shedding. From an economic perspective, it's the biggest challenge we have to getting faster economic growth. And I guess from a societal perspective, general, the health of communities and socio-political stability, it is the challenge of unemployment. Unemployment, as you mentioned, breaking our own records. South Africa's unemployment rate is now the highest in the world. Our youth unemployment rate is also up there with the highest in the world. So it's certainly the long-term structural challenges that we are still facing. Factors that were with us before COVID-19, factors that will be with us long time after COVID-19 is a lot less serious situation. So I guess we can almost say the challenges this year, they're nothing new. And they weren't new in 2021 either. There are the factors that we've been battling for many years and slow progress here or there, but it's the things that are keeping our economy from growing quicker and creating more jobs that we, again, have to deal with as COVID becomes less of an impediment on the economy.
So the conversation around electricity in South Africa has been on for years. It's just that it seems in the past several years it's got worse, and then using the situation with COVID-19 and the need of the economy to recover from recession. So given that load shedding seems to be the primary issue that South Africa has to basically, jump past for economic progress, what do you expect to happen in the electricity sector in 2022? Do you think this is the year that Eskom is finally going to be unbundled? We saw a number of municipalities moving to be able to provide and distribute and generate their own electricity. So there's obviously a need, but Eskom said they're going to fight this in court. But we're seeing that what they have right now simply cannot meet the needs of South Africans.
So electricity load shedding, it's the planned blackout of power to certain areas because there simply isn't enough electricity around for everyone to use. It's been around for about 15 years, but the past 3-4 years has been the most significant, where electricity would be reduced to households and businesses for 2, 3, 4, maybe even more 6 hours a day at a time for an unknown period. This is because of unexpected breakdowns and also planned maintenance taking certain elements offline. So you can imagine the negative impact this has on business activity and employment. It's something that combined with COVID-19 to send South Africa into a recession in 2020, and it also reduced the speed at which our recovery could happen during 2021. We've been seeing efforts from government for some time to try and resolve this. Eskom, the National Power.
All right, so I think we're having some technical difficulties there in reaching our guest, but getting into the conversation about South Africa's economic outlook for 2022 and the issues around Eskom will continue to dominate conversations. As Christie said, it has been a situation of load shedding for several years now, but in the past 3 to 4 years, that situation has just become much more untenable. And what we also find is that, as he said, it's affecting the country's economic progress and the ability of the country to also recover from the COVID-19 situation. So looking at what's happening next, President Cyril Ramaphosa has talked about the unbundling of Eskom into 3 units, talking about distribution, transmission, and generation. And it was about last week that we also heard that some municipalities were actually taking Eskom to courts in order to be able to get in on the electricity game. They no longer want to basically depend on South Africa's power utility. They want to be able to do this themselves. I do believe we have Christie back. Christie, are you back with us now?
Yes, I'm back. Apologies for that.
Fantastic, no problem. So pick up on that, because this conversation around electricity, whether or not South Africa is able to really get it in hand this year, will also determine how some of these projections about the country's economic growth play out.
Yes, so by our estimates, electricity load shedding reduces economic growth by several percentage points each year. You can calculate that into several 100,000 job opportunities that are just not created. So that sort of emphasizes how important it is to get this electricity situation sorted out. Recent developments, like you mentioned, the ability to generate more of your own electricity, whether it's a private company, whether it's municipalities, that's good news for the consumer. That's good news for companies, for municipalities. It's obviously not great news for Eskom, because they are in fact losing potential revenue streams. So it doesn't solve Eskom's financial problems, it doesn't solve their debt problems, and in the bigger scheme of things, because South Africa is so reliant on coal for energy generation, it doesn't solve the big environmental challenges that we have as a country. So any progress and good news that we see is going to be slow. It's going to be incremental. And at the end of the day, I'm getting asked this question a lot the past week. In 2022, what's electricity going to look like in South Africa? Probably much the same as it did last year. Unpredictable load shedding. We don't know when it's going to happen, how long it's going to happen, and it's going to continue dragging this economy down until we can really resolve that situation.
And that's unfortunate to hear, because part of the reason South Africa has been able to advance and become the most advanced economy on the continent is that provision of electricity and how it has helped the economy to grow. But it's not just the electricity sector. Now, South Africa does have some uncertainty around its economic progress, as does much of the continent for 2022. But when you look at where we're coming from, where South Africa is coming from in 2021, what are the sectors that you think will lead South Africa's recovery into 2022 and beyond?
So it's going to be similar to what we saw last year. The most important sectors will remain, for example, mining. We know mining did exceptionally well since about the 4th quarter of 2020 due to higher commodity prices. And alongside that is manufacturing, where the manufacturing sector both supplies resources to the mining sector, but also takes some of the minerals and processes them. So that's also good news for manufacturing. I think the big concern this year is probably for consumer-facing sectors, so retail, hospitality, tourism. When you consider that record high unemployment rate, when you consider that we lost more jobs last year, when you consider the pressure under household finances, when inflation is rising and when interest rates are rising, it means that consumer spending is under pressure, as it has been for quite a few years. So good news certainly for the secondary sector, mining, manufacturing. But when you get to the tertiary sector, services, the consumer-facing, that's going to have some challenges. Other industries that generally do quite well and have for many years done well would be finance and banking. South Africa's banking system very well developed in even global standards. I think that one sector that is actually under pressure that's often closely linked to this is business services, where these small consultancies, small businesses that provide services to companies have many of them have closed down over the past year and a half, simply because their clients do not have the ability to spend. So the outlook for 2022 from that perspective, I guess, is a mixed bag. You'll have certain industries doing well, and you'll have certain industries that are continuing to be under pressure, and that's just the domestic element. We're not even thinking at this stage of, for example, the number of travel bans that we are facing because we first announced to the world the Omicron variant. There's about 120 countries around the world that still have travel bans in place against South Africans traveling to them. So that's also a negative for tourism and hospitality.
All right, so let's quickly touch on the mining sector before we go for a break. And that contributed about over 100 billion rand to government coffers. And there was some kind of increase, but that was mostly dependent on taxes. Do you really think this trend will continue? And then again, back to this electricity, how is the lack of electricity also hampering that sector from being able to do more?
Yes, mining has done exceptionally well over the past year and a half. I think once let's say the first 6 months of the worst of the COVID-19 impact in 2020 was over, commodity prices started going up. It was a combination of supply chain problems and increase in demand. So commodity prices did very well, and South Africa's mining companies did very well on the back of that. So their revenues looked very good, and this contributed a big amount of unexpected tax revenues to government. We saw in November with the medium-term budget that the finance minister worked this into his calculations, and it makes for a much better fiscal situation right now. But the finance minister clearly warned that we should not rely on this forever. It's not going to be with us perennially. We know that commodities work in cycles. We know that these kinds of windfalls, they appear and then they disappear again. So for 2022, probably it's still going to be good news for commodity prices and mining, given what global economic growth is doing, given what global commodity prices are doing, and what the global supply chain situation is. So it's still certainly some good news for mining revenues this year. That's good news for government revenues, but it's not something that you can really rely on as a structural feature because commodities are so cyclical in nature.
All right, Christie, hold on. We're going to take a break now. When we come back, we'll get into more of the monetary and fiscal policies that may develop around South Africa in 2022. And that conversation, of course, will end with us expanding how the world's economic progress in this year could also be of benefit to Africa's most advanced economy. You're watching Business Edge. Stay with us. And still with me is Christie Viljoen, economist for PwC South Africa. Now, for the past 2 years, the government has been providing some sort of stimulus for the economy and South Africans. But we've seen that this is starting to roll back since 2021, since the later part of 2021. And the Minister of Finance is championing fiscal spending cuts in 2022. So what direction do you see the fiscal and monetary policies of the country heading in 2022?
From a fiscal perspective, it's going to be interesting. We had our medium-term budget published in November, and the finance minister was very clear on what he was planning. He wants to reduce the big fiscal deficit. He wants to put an end to this just continued increase in public debt. That was in keeping with his predecessor, and that's the narrative that the Ministry of Finance has been keeping for quite some time. But at the same time, we know that there's pressure on the finance ministry to continue paying out support measures given what the negative impact of COVID has been on employment. Some of these measures are continuing until March this year, which is the end of the current fiscal year, and the plan is then for these to end. However, given that we are somehow unable to create jobs and bring down that unemployment rate, there's lots of talk in political circles about extending these payments and seeing them transformed into some form of a basic income grant over time. Now, that means that money needs to come from somewhere to pay for these extra transfers. The finance minister says there isn't money, but from a political perspective, there's a big push for that. So it's going to be very tricky for him to balance these demands. The formal full-year budget is being delivered next month in February. And then we expect to see some clarity on his thinking about this proposed basic income grant, whatever it might be called, and what shape or form it might take, because we need at this stage some clear signaling about what the government is intending. In the end, the question is, where's the money coming from? There's two options, and both of them are a challenge. One is taking it from current expenditure, so reducing spending in one area, bringing it over to this spending point. The other option is to increase taxes. So you would then increase the personal income tax, for example, in the middle and the upper class. so they can finance these transfers for low-income earners. And that is going to be a difficult political potato as well. So there aren't really easy options from a financial perspective, and the political pressure is going to be there to get this through into the fiscal framework. It's going to be one of the key elements looking at when the formal budget is delivered next month.
All right, so let's talk about the projection. So the National Treasury has forecast an average real GDP growth of about just 1.7% per annum during 2022 into 2024. And this is quite conservative for South Africa's economy. Now, PwC has a slightly different GDP growth forecast of between 1.5 to 3% for 2022. The numbers are still, whether it's the National Treasury's numbers or PwC's numbers, their numbers are not where South Africa would like to be and where the economy also needs to be. So what are you looking at? What are the things that you think are going to combine to give us, to give South Africa that economic growth, whether it's at the 3% or 1.7, which is quite disappointing?
I'm actually quite happy with those conservative numbers from the National Treasury. We have, as South Africa, perennially over forecast growth. We've been over optimistic about economic growth. And when government is over optimistic, they think they're going to get more taxes than they actually do. And that means that in the end, you've got a bigger deficit on the budget. You've got a bigger increase in public debt. So I'm happy that the finance minister is conservative. There are projections for South Africa's economy to go about 3-4% this year. We are probably also a bit more conservative, somewhere less than 3%. Given all these structural challenges that we have, the electricity situation, the inability for us to create the jobs or actually just get back the jobs that we lost from COVID. So I'm thinking that after last year's economic growth, which most estimates would put between 4 and 5%, we're probably going to get about 2 to 3% this year. Which is maybe not that bad a number, but if you look at what South Africa really needs to make a significant impact on our challenges with unemployment, with poverty and inequality, we need economic growth closer to 5 or 6% over a sustained period, not just for 1 or 2 years, but over the next decade. We need economic growth about 5% to really make an impact on this poverty and inequality. And as mentioned earlier, one of the big solutions, which is not an easy solution, is the electricity situation. If we didn't have load shedding, economic growth could probably be 2, maybe 3 percentage points higher, which gets you towards that 5% level. So that's the one key issue that we have to work with. And I guess one of the long-standing issues when it comes to employment is the ability to get more people working for your company, but also the ability to, if they don't perform, get rid of them. In that sense, South Africa's labor market is quite strict, and that then hampers the ability of the private sector to really invest in new employment opportunities. It's a long-standing challenge that really isn't going to be easy to fix.
All right, so final question. Just like many other countries on the continent, South Africa would benefit from an overall better global economic growth and recovery in the coming year. And one analysis says that global economy will grow by 4% in 2022. So how do you think South Africa can benefit from the stronger global economic growth, particularly a rebound in the global supply chains? That seems to have held many countries right now by the neck because of the supply chain issues that COVID-19 has shown us.
Well, the stronger growth has already supported us through the pressure on commodity prices. So commodity prices going up, mining is doing quite well. That's good for the economy. That's good for government revenues. So we're already seeing this positive impact. Our biggest trading partners are also the biggest economies in the world, China, the USA, Europe, for example. So when they do well, we actually do well. The issue at the moment right now is that many of the Northern Hemisphere countries, the USA, lots of European countries, for example, they've now seen intensified lockdown restrictions because of a sudden onset of fourth and fifth wave infections around the Omicron variant. So there's pressure on those economies right now and probably within the next month or two that impacts on their demand for the goods that we actually export. So that's the biggest concern at the moment. In general, the view is that the global economy is doing quite well. The expectation is that the supply chain structure or the supply chain problems globally should improve during 2022. But as we stand at the moment with these new lockdowns and these new restrictions, it's probably a case of it's going to take longer than expected, which means that the economic growth globally is going to be a bit slower this year than previously anticipated. There'll be lots of forecasts at the moment, lots of different numbers out there. But I think at this stage, it's probably a case of taking it week by week before we can better understand how the COVID situation in these advanced and these large economies will play out in the next few months, and how then that impacts the demand for South African goods.
All right, so we'll leave it there for now, Christie. And I know throughout the year we'll definitely be touching base. As you said, the budget is coming in February, a number of issues around unemployment, trying to bridge the inequality and poverty gap as well. So we will be watching things very closely to see how they develop in South Africa. Thank you as always for joining me, and once again, Happy New Year.
Thank you very much, and hopefully some more good news next time we speak.
Very true. And as he said, the numbers are a bit conservative, but sometimes governments have been just a little too optimistic, and that has led them down a trail or an avenue that they would rather not take. But we'll be watching how things play out in South Africa, the continent's most developed and advanced economy. Many eyes are there, 34.9% unemployment, electricity load shedding, as well as the impact of the violence in mid-2021 following the country into 2022. But as Christie said, the next few weeks and months will really tell to see how things will develop. You're watching Business Edge. When we come back, it's NC4 to watch. And here are a few stories we're keeping our eyes on. This is NC4 to watch as we wrap things up on Business Edge. Foreign investor outflows at the Nairobi Securities Exchange slowed down in 2021, offering hope of a recovery in the market going forward, although political headwinds in 2022 remain a risk. Net foreign sales at the burst stood at 12.4 billion Kenyan shillings in 2021, more than half the record outflows of 28.63 billion recorded in 2020. The World Bank is ringing the warning bells on Nigeria's debt, saying that despite being considered sustainable at the moment, it is vulnerable and costly. The Bretton Woods institution noted that while the country's debt stock was 27% of the GDP and thus considered sustainable, any macro fiscal shock can push debt to unsustainable levels. OPEC has voted to appoint Kuwaiti candidate Haitham Al-Ghais as its new Secretary General. The appointment came after the oil cartel voted at a special meeting at the conference. He will replace Mohammed Sanusi Barkindo, a Nigerian representative, when his second term as OPEC Secretary General ends July 2022. And finally, a proposed tax on aircraft flying to and from South Africa over Zimbabwe is getting serious support in response to South Africa's Home Affairs decisions not to renew residency permits for Zimbabweans. The Zimbabwe exemption permits expired on December 31st, leaving an estimated 250,000 Zimbabweans at risk of losing their jobs, their bank accounts, and of being deported. And that's Business Edge for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Kicking off the new year, of course, keeping the focus on African business, the economy, and financial news from here on the continent. We will keep everything African front and center right here on News Central. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. I'll see you soon.